In the summer of 1565, on a tiny island in the middle of the Mediterranean, 700 knights and a handful of soldiers waited behind cracked stone walls. Across the harbor, 40,000 Ottoman troops were unloading from one of the largest war fleets the world had ever seen. The most powerful empire on earth had come to wipe them out. And what happened over the next 4 months would decide the fate of Europe. This is the story of the Great Siege of Malta, the siege that should have ended in a massacre, the siege that almost did. Before going further, this channel covers the battles history class never had time for. If that sounds like your thing, the subscribe button is right there and it costs you nothing. Now let us begin. To understand why this siege happened, we have to go back. The year is 1530. The Knights of St. John, also called the Hospitallers, are a religious military order founded during the Crusades. For 200 years, they had ruled the island of Rhodes, off the coast of Turkey. From there, they raided Ottoman shipping, freed Christian slaves, and made themselves a permanent thorn in the side of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. In 1522, Suleiman finally lost his patience. He sailed against Rhodes with 200,000 men. The knights held out for 6 months, but the numbers were too much. They surrendered. And in an act of strange mercy, Suleiman let them sail away alive. He would regret that mercy for the rest of his life. The knights wandered for 8 years, homeless, looking for a base. Finally, the King of Spain gave them a barren rock in the middle of the Mediterranean. The rent was 1 Maltese falcon per year, delivered to the Spanish Viceroy of Sicily. The island was called Malta. And from Malta, the knights did exactly what they had done from Rhodes. They raided. They captured Ottoman merchant ships. They freed slaves. They sank galleys. By the 1560s, their attacks on Ottoman trade had become so painful that Suleiman, now 70 years old, made a decision. The knights would not be allowed to escape a second time. This time, every single one of them would die. In the spring of 1565, the Ottoman fleet sailed. 193 ships. 40,000 men, including the elite janissaries, the most feared infantry in the world. The plan was simple. Take Malta in a few weeks, then use it as a launching point to invade Sicily, then Italy, then Rome itself. If Malta fell, there was almost nothing left to stop them. Inside the island, the Grand Master of the Knights was a 70-year-old Frenchman named Jean Parisot de Valette. He was a warrior of the old kind, scarred from decades of fighting the Ottomans. He had been a galley slave for a year after being captured at sea. He knew exactly what surrender would mean, so he refused to even consider it. Valette had around 700 knights, including the wounded and the elderly. Add to that some 5,000 Maltese militia, a few hundred Spanish soldiers, and a handful of mercenaries. Roughly 6,000 defenders, total, against 40,000 Ottomans. He spent the months before the invasion fortifying 3 positions: the old capital, Medina, in the center of the island; the fortress of St. Angelo, the heart of the Knights' base; and a small star-shaped fort across the harbor called St. Elmo. St. Elmo guarded the entrance to the Grand Harbor. If the Ottomans took it, their fleet could sail right in. Valette knew St. Elmo was the key. The Ottomans knew it too. On the 18th of May, 1565, the Ottoman fleet appeared on the horizon. The siege began. The Ottoman commanders held a council of war. There were 2 of them, and they disagreed almost immediately. Mustafa Pasha, the army commander, wanted to attack Medina first and march south. Piali Pasha, the admiral, refused. His fleet, he said, was exposed in the open sea. He needed a sheltered harbor, and that meant taking St. Elmo first. He won the argument. It was, looking back, the single worst decision the Ottomans made in the entire campaign. St. Elmo was tiny. It was supposed to hold out for 5 days, maybe a week, while Valette built up his defenses elsewhere. The Ottomans threw everything at it: 60,000 cannonballs, wave after wave of janissaries climbing the walls. The defenders inside, never more than a few hundred men at a time, were rotated in by boat at night across the harbor. When the boats could no longer get through, the men inside knew they were going to die. They held for 31 days. 31 days of constant bombardment. 31 days where every single defender knew that the next assault might be the last one. When the fort finally fell on the 23rd of June, only 9 knights were taken alive and they were promptly executed. The Ottoman commander Mustafa Pasha, furious at the losses, ordered the bodies of the dead knights nailed to wooden crosses and floated across the harbor to terrify the rest of the garrison. When Valette saw the crucified bodies of his men, he did something history has rarely forgotten. He ordered all Ottoman prisoners executed. Their heads were loaded into cannons and fired back across the water. There would be no surrender. There would be no mercy. There would only be the siege. Saint Elmo had cost the Ottomans somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 men, including the legendary corsair Dragut, killed by a splinter from his own cannon. When Mustafa Pasha looked across the harbor at the main fortification still waiting for him, he is supposed to have said, "If the daughter has cost us so dear, what will the price be for the mother?" He was about to find out. The Ottoman army now turned its full force on the 2 remaining strongholds, Sanglia and Birgu, the heart of the Knights' base. For the next 2 months, the assaults were almost constant. They dug trenches. They built siege towers. They tried a surprise naval landing, which the defenders shattered with a hidden cannon battery firing directly into the boats at point-blank range. Hundreds of janissaries drowned in their armor. They tried mining the walls. They tried bridges over the ditches. Every assault came back broken. The defenders, including women and children carrying water and ammunition to the walls, held on through July, through August, into September. Inside the fortifications, conditions were collapsing. Food was running out. Wounded men lay in the streets because there was no more room in the infirmaries. Valette, now 71, refused to leave the front lines. When his officers begged him to retreat to the inner citadel, he said simply that he would die where his knights were dying. He took a wound to the leg and refused to stop fighting. Meanwhile, across the sea, Don Garcia de Toledo, the Spanish viceroy of Sicily, was supposed to be sending a relief force. He delayed and delayed. He had 11,000 men and was terrified of losing them. Letters from Malta begged him to come. He did not. By early September, the Ottoman army was breaking. Disease was tearing through the camp. Supplies were running short. The autumn storms were coming, and Piali Pasha was getting nervous about his fleet being trapped on a dangerous coast. The defenders of Birgu and Sanglia, down to perhaps 600 men still able to fight, were starting to believe they would die at their posts alone. And then, on the 7th of September, the relief finally came. Don Garcia had finally moved. 8,000 fresh Spanish soldiers landed on the north of the island. When the Ottoman commanders heard the news, they panicked. They thought a much larger army had arrived. They began loading their ships in chaos. Then, hearing again that the relief force was actually smaller, they tried to turn around and fight. By then it was too late. The Ottomans were exhausted. The Spanish were fresh and disciplined. The battle was short, and the Ottomans broke. By the 12th of September, the last Ottoman ship was gone. The numbers tell the story. The Ottomans had landed 40,000 men. They left with perhaps 10,000 still alive. Some estimates put the death toll even higher. The Knights had lost around 250 of their 700. The Maltese militia and Spanish troops had lost thousands more. Whole villages were destroyed. But the island still stood. Across Europe, the reaction was disbelief. Bells were rung in churches from Lisbon to Vienna. Queen Elizabeth I of England, who normally had no love for the Catholic Knights, ordered 3 weeks of public thanksgiving. Voltaire, 2 centuries later, would write a single line that summed it up. Nothing is better known than the siege of Malta. Suleiman the Magnificent, the most powerful ruler in the world, died the following year. He had been planning a second invasion of Malta. It never came. The Ottoman expansion into the Western Mediterranean stopped at that island. The dream of Istanbul ruling Rome quietly faded. So why does this matter? Why was a 4-month fight on a rock in the sea so important? Because Malta was the door. If the Ottomans had taken it, Sicily was next. From Sicily, southern Italy. From Italy, every Christian capital was within reach of an Ottoman army that no European state could have stopped alone. The Knights of Malta, with their 700 men and their refusal to surrender, bought Europe time. Time to organize. Time to build. Time that, 118 years later, would lead directly to the Second Great Ottoman defeat at the gates of Vienna. Jean de Valette died 3 years after the siege. He never returned to France. He was buried on Malta, in a city that, after his death, the rebuilders named in his honor, Valletta. It is still the capital of Malta today. And every year, on the 8th of September, the island celebrates Victory Day. The bells ring. The cannons fire. And on a small rocky island in the middle of the sea, people remember that once, a long time ago, 700 knights refused to die. If this story moved you, drop a like and let me know in the comments which siege you want covered next. The fall of Constantinople is already on the way, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Until next time.